There's a version of you that everyone loves. Agreeable, warm, never too much, always available. The one who checks in first, who forgives fast, who laughs off the things that actually cut deep. The one who, when someone walks all over them, finds a way, genuinely finds a way to justify it. They're going through a lot. It wasn't that serious. I don't want to make it a whole thing. And here's what nobody tells you about that version of you. That version is not your virtue. That version is your armor. And it is slowly, quietly, suffocating the person wearing it. This video is a deep excavation of why so many people are living trapped inside the compulsive need to appear good, and what actually happens psychologically and socially when you finally stop performing goodness and start inhabiting something far more powerful: realness. We're going to use Niccolò Machiavelli as our scalpel, not the cartoon villain history made him, not the name people drop when they want to justify being ruthless. The actual Machiavelli, the man who sat in political exile in 16th century Florence, stripped of everything, and decided to write down the one thing no one in power was willing to say out loud: that the world does not run on morality. It runs on perception, consequence, and will. His most dangerous idea wasn't that you should be cruel. It was that you should be honest. Honest about the game being played, honest about the cost of pretending otherwise, honest about what your endless niceness is actually doing to you and to the people around you. By the time this video ends, you're going to see something you cannot unsee. You're going to understand the specific psychological mechanism behind why good people get used. Why the most accommodating person in any room is often the least respected, and, most importantly, what the alternative actually looks like. Not cruelty, not coldness. Something far more sophisticated. But first, we have to go somewhere uncomfortable. We have to talk about what being a good person is actually costing you. And to do that, we need to meet the wound at the center of it. You weren't born this way. No infant comes into the world preloaded with the anxiety of other people's comfort. No infant lies awake at night thinking, "I hope I didn't disappoint anyone today." That's not instinct. That's training, and it started so early, so quietly, that you have almost certainly never identified the exact moment it happened. But it happened. Something taught you. Through repetition, through reward and withdrawal, through the expressions on the faces of the people who held power over your world, that your acceptance was conditional. Not your survival. Your acceptance, your belonging, your sense of being loved rather than merely tolerated. Maybe it was a parent who went cold when you expressed anger, not violently, just cold, distant. And your early nervous system, which is essentially a belonging detection machine, learned the equation instantly. Anger equals abandonment. Compliance equals love. Maybe it was a classroom where the students who got laughed at were the ones who stood out. Too loud, too opinionated, too much. And you watched that happen to someone else, and you made a decision. Probably unconsciously, probably before you had the vocabulary to call it a decision. Don't be too much. Maybe it was subtler than any of that. Maybe it was just that the adults around you were stressed, distracted, emotionally unavailable. And the version of you that got the most attention, the most warmth, was the version that didn't need anything. The easy one, the helpful one, the one who made things smoother, so you became that. And then you got so good at it that you forgot you were doing it. Here is what developmental psychology has been circling for decades, the thing Machiavelli intuited about human nature 500 years before the field existed. Most people's social behavior is not an expression of their character. It is a survival strategy that calcified into identity. Your niceness is not who you are. It's what you learn to do to stay safe. That distinction between character and strategy is going to matter enormously, because one of those things you can build on, and one of them is quietly eating you alive. Think about the last time someone asked you to do something you genuinely didn't want to do. Not a reasonable request, something that cost you time, energy, emotional bandwidth you didn't have. And you said yes anyway. And what happened in your body in the half-second before you said yes? There was a flicker, wasn't there? A flicker of the no you actually wanted to say. And then something, faster than thought, smoother than logic, overrode it, and out came the yes, maybe even an enthusiastic yes. That flicker is the real you. The yes is the strategy. And the longer you've been doing this, the faster that override happens. Until eventually you stop noticing the flicker altogether. Eventually you genuinely don't know what you want, because you've spent so many years being what everyone else needed, that your own internal signal has gone almost completely dark. That's not virtue. That's a slow erasure. Machiavelli called this being used without knowing it. And the worst part of his observation, the part that lands like a stone, is this. The people using you aren't necessarily malicious. They're just doing what people do. They're taking what's freely offered. You train them to expect it. And now the system is running exactly as designed. So how did we end up here? How did a coping mechanism become an identity and an identity become a cage? That's exactly what the next section is about. And what it reveals is going to feel like being seen in an almost uncomfortable way. Let's be precise. Let's talk about actual moments, not concepts. Moments. You're in a meeting. Someone takes credit for something you did. Not dramatically, just casually, in the way confident people sometimes rewrite narratives. And everyone in the room accepts it. And you sit there, and you do the mental calculation. Is it worth making this awkward? Do I want to be the person who makes this a thing? And you decide it's not worth it, you let it go. And then you go home and you're irritated for the rest of the night and you don't fully know why. Or a friend cancels on you. Again. Third time this month. And when you feel the frustration rising, you immediately perform emotional judo on yourself. You think about their stress. You think about how you'd want to be treated. You talk yourself into understanding. And you text back, "No worries at all, hope you're okay." And you mean it kind of. But there's a residue. A sediment is building up, or you're in a relationship, romantic, familial, professional, doesn't matter. And you realize that your role in this relationship has a shape, the shape of someone who manages, absorbs, and accommodates. And you've been in that shape so long that when you try to imagine asking for what you actually need, the words feel wrong. Like you'd be violating some agreement that nobody signed but everybody seems to know about. This is the invisible cost, not the dramatic betrayals, not the obvious exploitations, the daily micro-surrenders that nobody sees, including you, because each one is so small, so reasonable, so justified. But here's what Machiavelli understood about small surrenders. They compound. They don't stay small. Every time you override your own instinct in favor of social comfort, you are reinforcing a neural pathway that says your needs are negotiable. And every time you do that, the threshold for what you'll tolerate shifts. Slightly, but it shifts. And then one day, and this is the moment so many people describe, the moment that brought them to videos like this one. One day you look at your life and realize that you have arranged everything to accommodate everyone except yourself. Your career moved in the direction that caused the least friction. Your relationships are with people who rely on you but don't really see you. Your days are structured around what needs to be managed, and somewhere in there, buried under all the managing, is the faint outline of a person who had actual desires once. Machiavelli had a word for this state. He called it servitude, and his most cutting observation was that the most durable form of servitude is the kind the captive has been convinced to call virtue. You don't feel like a prisoner. You feel like a good person. That's the genius of the trap. Now here's the thing that should unsettle you. The people around you are not neutral parties in this dynamic, and understanding their role, understanding the social physics of what your niceness actually communicates, is where Machiavelli gets genuinely dangerous, because the revelation in the next section is not comfortable. It reframes something you thought was a strength, and it explains why, despite all your effort, all your generosity, all your carefully maintained goodness, you keep ending up feeling unseen. Power is not a dirty word, it is a description. Every social interaction involves a negotiation of power. Not necessarily conscious, not necessarily aggressive, but constant. Who speaks more? Who defers? Who sets the pace? Who adjusts and who is adjusted to? This negotiation happens in milliseconds, below language, in tone and posture and the speed at which you apologize. And here is Machiavelli's central insight, the one that made The Prince so disturbing to its original readers. People form their assessment of you not from your intentions but from the signals you emit. And the signal of chronic niceness, of perpetual accommodation, of the person who never pushes back, never inconveniences anyone, never makes the room feel the weight of their displeasure. That signal reads at a biological level as low consequence. Low consequence means this person will not react. This person can be rescheduled. This person can be given the smaller piece. This person's feelings, when weighed against the cost of considering them, can be rounded down. This is not cruelty. This is the cold hydraulics of how social groups allocate resources and attention. And the brutal irony is that the nicer you are, the stronger this signal becomes. Because true goodness that comes from strength looks completely different from the appeasing behavior most people call niceness. Think about the people you genuinely respect, not like, not feel comfortable around. Respect. Almost certainly those people have a quality of definiteness. They have opinions. They hold positions. When they disagree with you, you feel it. Not aggressively, but clearly. When they say yes to something, you believe it because you've also seen them say no. That's not coldness. That's presence. And presence is the thing your chronic niceness is preventing. Machiavelli wrote that a prince who is known only for his mercy will be taken advantage of, not because people are evil, but because people are adaptive. They adapt to whatever system they're in. And if the system around you has no consequence, no friction, no shape, people will expand into it. Naturally, without malice. The way water fills any container you give it. You've been giving people a very large container. Now I want to be careful here, because this is where people make a catastrophic mistake. They hear this analysis and they overcorrect. They decide that the solution is to make it difficult. Withholding, cold. They mistake hardness for strength, and they end up performing a kind of emotional armor that's just as much a performance as the niceness was, just angrier. That's not what Machiavelli was pointing at, and it's not where this is going. Because what Machiavelli actually respected, what he described in his most careful moments, was not cruelty. It was virtue in the original Latin sense. Virtu, not goodness, not pleasantness, potency. The quality of someone who is fully, consequentially, undeniably present. And understanding the difference between virtue as performance and virtue as reality, that's the shift. That's the actual transformation. And how it happens and what it requires and why it's harder and more necessary than anything else in this video. That's what we're getting to next. Here's a question nobody asks often enough. Why do you want to be seen as good? Not why is goodness valuable? Why do you specifically need others to perceive you as good? Because there's a crucial difference between being a person of integrity and needing to be seen as good. One is about your relationship with your own values. The other is about your relationship with other people's approval. And almost everyone who calls themselves a people pleaser is, at their core, not actually trying to help people. They are trying to manage people's perception of them. The generosity is real. The care is sometimes real. But underneath it is a transaction. I will make you comfortable so that you will see me the way I need to be seen. Machiavelli identified this dynamic in rulers and it destroyed them. The prince who governed by seeking love, who needed his subjects' affection, who structured every decision around being approved of, that prince was functionally governed by his subjects. His need for their approval was the real power in the room. They just let him wear the crown. Does that structure feel familiar? The shift, the real one, the one that actually changes how you move through rooms and relationships, is not about becoming less kind. It is about locating your authority inside yourself rather than in other people's responses to you. This is almost embarrassingly simple to describe and extraordinarily difficult to actually do. Because it requires tolerating something most people haven't built a tolerance for. The discomfort of being disapproved of. Let's make this visceral. Imagine you're in a conversation and someone says something. Maybe about you, maybe about someone you care about. That's wrong. Not ambiguously wrong. Clearly wrong. And you know it. And you feel the familiar pull. Don't make it weird. Let it go. It'll blow over. Internal authority means feeling that pull and speaking anyway. Not loudly, not dramatically, just accurately. Calmly stating what's true for you. As if your perception has the right to exist in the room. That moment, that small, quiet, terrifying moment of not swallowing your actual perspective, is where the shift lives. Not in a grand declaration, not in a dramatic confrontation. In the accumulation of small moments where you choose your own perception over social comfort. Machiavelli called this knowing your own mind. He considered it the foundational skill of anyone who wanted to exercise any kind of genuine power in their life. Because if you don't know your own mind, you will always be operating on someone else's agenda. You will call it flexibility, you will call it empathy, but it will just be drift. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting and genuinely uncomfortable. Because internal authority doesn't just change how you feel. It changes how people treat you, almost immediately. And the change is not always pleasant at first. When you stop being infinitely accommodating, when you develop edges, positions, a no that you mean. Some people in your life will respond strangely, with distance, with what almost feels like offense. And your nervous system will interpret this as evidence that you've done something wrong, that you've become a worse person. What's actually happening is something Machiavelli would have recognized instantly. The people who are disturbed by your new boundaries are precisely the people whose comfort depended on you having none. You didn't become worse. You became less useful as a mirror, less manageable as a resource. And that discomfort you feel when they pull back, that's the price of admission. What comes after it? What happens to the people and relationships that remain? That's where this gets extraordinary. And I'm not going to rush to it because what's coming in the next section fundamentally rewrites what you thought you knew about connection, respect, and what it actually feels like to be loved rather than needed. The first thing that changes is the quality of silence. This sounds strange, so let me explain. Right now, when you're in a room with people, and especially people who matter to you, there's probably a kind of low-grade vigilance running in the background. A monitoring. Is everyone okay? Is the energy right? Does anyone seem uncomfortable? It's constant, it's exhausting. And you've been doing it so long you've stopped calling it exhausting and started calling it just how you are. When you build internal authority, when you stop outsourcing your sense of okayness to the emotional state of everyone around you, that monitoring drops. Not because you stop caring about people, because you stop needing them to be okay in order for you to be okay. And what rushes in to fill that space is at first slightly disorienting, quiet, actual mental quiet. The second thing that changes is the nature of your relationships, and this is the one people don't expect. When you stop being someone who absorbs and accommodates everything, you stop attracting people who need someone to absorb and accommodate everything. The energetic signature shifts. The relationships that were built on the implicit deal. You manage me and I'll call you important. Those relationships either restructure or dissolve. And yes, some of them dissolving will hurt. Some of them will hurt more than you expect because some of them you called close. But here's what Machiavelli observed and what every serious person who has done this work confirms. When the transactional relationships are clear, what becomes visible is something different, rarer. People who are in your life not because you make their life easy, but because they find the actual you, the definite, boundary, authentic you, genuinely compelling. That experience of being wanted for your presence rather than your function is one that chronic people-pleasers often describe as the first time they felt actually loved, as opposed to appreciated. And the difference between those two things is not subtle. One fills you, the other depletes you and asks you to call the depletion gratitude. The third change is perhaps the most Machiavellian. You become more effective. Not despite your edges, but because of them. Machiavelli was obsessed with effectiveness, with the gap between stated intention and actual outcome. And one of his most uncomfortable observations was that good people, in their desperation to be seen as good, often produce worse outcomes than people who are willing to be disliked. Because the good person can't say the hard thing, can't cut the losing strategy, can't tell the uncomfortable truth, because all of those things risk disapproval, And disapproval is existentially threatening when your identity is built on being liked. The person with internal authority, the person who has unhooked their self-worth from other people's responses, can tell the truth in a board meeting when the truth is unpopular, can end a project that isn't working before it becomes a catastrophe, can say to a friend, "I care about you and what you're doing is going to hurt you. And I'm going to say that even if you don't like me for it." That's not cruelty. That's the highest form of respect, and it's only available to you when you've stopped needing the other person's approval more than you need to be honest. Machiavelli called this acting for the long-term health of the thing you're responsible for rather than for the short-term comfort of the current moment. And he was ruthlessly clear. The leader who governs by comfort, who tells people what they want to hear, who avoids the difficult conversation, who is more invested in being loved than in being useful. That leader produces worse outcomes, always, without exception, not because they're bad, because they're managing perception instead of reality. You have been managing perception your whole life. Imagine what becomes possible when you manage reality instead. But before we close this, there's something we need to address directly. The thing that's been nagging at you through this entire video. The question underneath the question. If I stop being good, if I drop the performance, build the edges, prioritize my own authority, does that make me a bad person? Let's be surgical about this, because this distinction is the entire point, and it's one Machiavelli made, and one almost everyone who writes about him ignores. He did not say morality is worthless. He said performed morality, unrooted in reality, is worse than worthless, because it is a pretense that costs you while providing nothing. He made a distinction between two things that get constantly collapsed: appearing good and being effective while maintaining integrity. The person who appears good is managed by image. Every decision runs through the filter of what will this make people think of me. They give not from abundance but from anxiety. They forgive not from strength but from the inability to hold an honest position. Their kindness is real, but it is contingent. Contingent on being seen, being validated, being called a good person. The person with integrity, real integrity, the kind Machiavelli would have recognized as virtue, that person gives from a different place. They help because they have chosen to. They forgive because they understand it serves their own peace, not because they fear what happens if they don't. They set limits not as punishment, but as information. This is where I end. This is who I am. This is what I will and will not carry. The difference is not visible from the outside in any given moment. Both people can do the same thing. Offer help, extend generosity, choose patience. But one of them is doing it from a place of surplus, from choice, from internal authority. And the other is doing it from scarcity, from compulsion, from the fear of what disapproval feels like. You feel the difference from the inside. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The people around you feel it too. They may not be able to name it, but they respond to it. The person who gives from strength commands a different kind of gratitude than the person who gives from fear. Because gratitude and respect are not the same emotion. And you can be deeply thanked while being quietly, or not so quietly, disregarded. What Machiavelli wanted, for himself, for the rulers he advised, and implicitly for anyone with the clarity to read him carefully, was not badness. He wanted realness. He wanted people who knew what they were doing, why they were doing it, and who they were doing it for. He wanted people who could distinguish. between a genuinely generous impulse and a fear response dressed up in the language of virtue. He wanted you to stop lying to yourself, not about the world, about yourself, because the deepest lie chronic people-pleasers tell themselves is not the world is fair or people will reciprocate. It's this one. I'm doing this for them. You're not. You're doing it for you. For the feeling of safety that comes from being needed, from being approved of, from never being the source of anyone's displeasure, and that's not nothing. That's a real human need. But it's not a strategy, it's not a life, and it's absolutely categorically not the same thing as being a good person. Being a good person requires knowing who you are. And you cannot know who you are when you are constantly shape-shifting to match what everyone around you needs you to be. This is Machiavelli's most subversive gift, the one buried under centuries of misreading and caricature, the path to genuine virtue, the kind that actually means something, the kind that changes rooms and protects people and creates something worth having. Starts not with being nicer. It starts with being truer, truer to your actual perceptions, your actual limits, your actual values as opposed to the values you've claimed because they made you easy to love. So here's where we are. You spent most of your life performing a version of goodness that was never actually about goodness. It was about safety, about belonging, about the specific embodied terror of what happens when someone who matters withdraws their approval. And that performance, however well-intentioned, however genuinely felt in moments, has been costing you your presence, your weight, your actual life, in the sense that a life is the accumulation of choices you actually made, rather than the permissions you waited for. Machiavelli didn't write The Prince to create tyrants. He wrote it in exile, stripped of power, stripped of position. And it reads, if you look at it honestly, like the work of a man who finally had nothing left to lose and decided to say the thing. The real thing, the thing that all the polite discourse, all the careful courtly language, all the political performance was designed to obscure. The thing is this: how you carry yourself through the world is a choice. And most people are making that choice unconsciously, in response to old wounds, old conditioning, old equations they learned before they had the cognitive equipment to question them. Waking up, actually waking up, not just intellectually agreeing with the idea of waking up, means accepting the discomfort of revising those equations. Means sitting with the anxiety of disappointing someone without immediately moving to fix it. Means tolerating the moment after you've said the true thing, when you can't know yet how it will land, and staying in that moment instead of rushing to apologize, to soften, to take it back. It means treating your own perception as evidence, not infallible, not immune to revision, but valid, present, worthy of being spoken. Here's what I want to leave you with, and it's not a summary, it's a provocation. You've been trying to be good your whole life, and you've gotten very good at it, at the performance of it, at the social choreography of it. And the cost has been real, the exhaustion is real, the invisibility is real, the quiet accumulation of moments where you chose other people's comfort over your own reality. That's real. But here's what's also real. You've never fully tested the alternative. You've never fully inhabited the version of you that has weight. That takes up space. That can be genuinely moved, genuinely delighted, genuinely angered, genuinely present, without immediately managing how that looks to everyone else. Machiavelli believed that the most dangerous person in any room was not the cruelest or the most cunning. It was the person who had nothing to prove and nothing to perform, who had done the interior work of knowing exactly who they were and had stopped apologizing for it. That person is not a threat because they're aggressive. They're formidable because they're free. And freedom, real freedom, the kind you feel in your chest and not just your head, is what every strategy of chronic niceness is designed, however unconsciously, to prevent. You don't become that person by becoming worse. You become that person by becoming more honest, more defined, more willing to let the shape of who you actually are exist in the world, even when that shape is inconvenient for someone else. And stop trying to be a good person, be a real one. And now, here's the question I actually want you to sit with, not just in the comments, before the comments. Right now, while it's live in you. When was the last time you wanted something, clearly, simply, without qualification? And you didn't hide it, not performed wanting it, not wanted it in a way that was carefully packaged, not to inconvenience anyone, just wanted it, out loud, unapologetically. Drop that in the comments, the moment, the want, even if it's small, especially if it's small, because the accumulation of small true things is how you build a life that's actually yours. And if this video landed, if it cracked something open rather than just confirming what you already knew, then the next video is going to go somewhere you're not ready for. We're going to talk about what happens after you claim your authority, what it does to your relationships in ways that are darker and more necessary than anything we covered here, the losses that come, and why they're not actually losses. Don't miss it. You've earned what comes next.